live on YouTube now, from now on. So welcome to our millions of viewers around the planet to the ECIU Student Symposium on Student Wellbeing here at the University of Tampere. And Professor Sarah Speigt is Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Nottingham, responsible for innovation in education, and is giving the keynote speech.
Thank you very much, Niall. He doesn't know what I do because he's just promoted me. So just in case my boss is listening, it's all right, boss. I know I'm the Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor and not the Pro-Vice Chancellor. So anyway, thank you very much, Niall, and thank you very much, Sandra, and my colleagues on the ECIU steering group for inviting me to give this keynote. And I'm just going to follow my colleague Cassie's lead in saying I'm Sarah Speigt and my preferred pronouns are she and her. I identify as being female. You know, this is another way in which society is changing, isn't it? And we are trying to acknowledge more and more those of us who are not binary and do not identify with a particular agenda. Let me give you a bit of a background then. So I'm from the University of Nottingham. We're not as large as Tech de Monterey, thank goodness, but we are one of the biggest universities in England. We have about 45,000 students. That includes actually our campuses in China and in Malaysia. So we are big, and I think we've got about 9,000 members of staff. And my role, when I'm not trying to take over my bosses, is that I have the portfolio for really improvements to teaching and improvement to the learning environment for our students. And so that's really my day job. And I'm your keynote speaker, not because I'm a specialist, but precisely because I'm not. And again, many of you have been making the point in what you've been saying that when we think about student mental health and well-being, it has to be about normalising it, doesn't it? So that it is a standard part of all of the processes and policies that we are developing. Hence, I'm not a specialist. I happen to be in a leadership role with responsibility, but I am, of course, a member of the human race, like everyone in this room. And so hopefully I'm imbued with that humanity and that common sense which needs to be at the part of our strategies. And I am, of course, I've been a university student myself, and I'm currently the parent of a university student. So my plan for the session, a bit of an intro, go back to a couple of definitions, why is it an issue, and then talk about some of the context, and very much how strategies play out within the universities within the United Kingdom. I'm going to try and get you to join in a bit, and so several of you have got Post-it notes. I'll leave a block at the front there so colleagues can throw them around the room for those people who haven't got them, who've come in the last few minutes. And when I gather in those Post-it notes at the end of the session, then hopefully we'll have time during the day or during our extended lunch break where I can do a quick kind of scrutiny of what you've written and give you a bit of feedback before we end the day this afternoon. Right, so hopefully that will work for everyone. And so here, this is your first task then. So at some point while I'm talking, make sure you've got a couple of Post-it notes, and I'd like you to answer these questions for me. And this slide will go up again at the end of my talk, so don't worry, you'll get another opportunity to see it. So if you could just focus on one thing. You know, what one thing would you like tutors to change, to learn to do, to support the good mental health and well-being of students? And what one thing do you think your university does at the moment that you think is really effective in helping students to maintain good health and well-being? Yes, Andrea? By tutors, I'm really I suppose my focus is on staff who are having direct contact in an academic environment with students. So I'm really thinking about academics, and that could be academics of all grades, all levels, that could be associate staff as well. Okay, just write student or staff on your Post-it note because I want to see as well, is there a difference in our perspectives? Those of us who are now staff, do we give slightly different responses to those of us who are students? And if we do, in a sense, that's quite an important little signal that I know the ECIU would want to pick up in this phase of work that we're involved in, which is very, very much about listening to students and working in partnership, as several of my colleagues have said already. Okay, so don't worry, those questions will go up on the slides at the end of the presentation as well. Right, let's have a bit of an introduction then. So as a society, we are much, much more conscious, aren't we, of our mental health today than we have been in previous generations. You know, many of us in this room can think back to our own parents, our grandparents, for whom mental health or poor mental health was such a stigma, the undiagnosis of mental health until fairly recent generations. And so we're now, fortunately, in the position of understanding those triggers that contribute to that deterioration. Poverty, relationship breakdown, unemployment, physical health, bereavement, again, many things that have been mentioned already. And we are slowly destigmatizing. As we see in this quotation from a very important figure in UK higher education. So Nicola Dandridge is the Chief Executive of Universities UK, which is a body that brings together all of the Vice-Chancellors and the principals of all of the universities. So it's a very, very powerful body that obviously has the ear of government and tries to influence government. And so what she's saying here is obviously higher education has a challenge. Its support services have got to be effective. But at the same time, she points out that those of us in the room here, we work or study in universities. Universities are not the national health services and agencies. They have a level of responsibility and expertise, but they cannot do everything. They've got to know when they need to make sure that those students are getting into the professional national agencies to get the help that they need. She also makes a point in her last sentence there about the destigmatization is about making sure that we leave behind those deficit models. And I think, again, that's an ongoing theme of the comments that have been made already today. It's not about remedial action, isn't it, for someone in crisis? It's about, where you can, about supporting students to avoid getting to that crisis point. So this is big stuff in the UK these days. We're very, very conscious of the work that we need to do to improve situations so that we don't have exam roulette, as referred to by Andrea, and that our learning environments are challenging, they're rigorous, but they're also supportive and humane. Let's just have a couple of definitions then to, again, make sure we're all clear what we're talking about. So in my job, because I'm not a health professional, my job is about good mental health in our everyday provision for students, and my particular focus is on the curriculum. And so there we're talking about recognising the kind of normal emotional resilience that hopefully many of us have, which means we can cope with a reasonable level of exam stress, because stress is also good, remember, isn't it? There's good stress as well as bad stress. And that we can cope with the everyday trials and tribulations of life, and that we've got coping strategies, and so we can self-manage and we can support others. And so positive, good mental health is something that hopefully most of us have for a large proportion of the time. But again, as that last sentence says, it's quite possible for me or for anyone to have a good sense of my mental well-being, but also to be living with a diagnosed mental illness. So it's recognising that distinction between mental health, which everyone has, good, bad, indifferent, and mental illness, which a subsection of us have, which may or may not be diagnosed. And mental health difficulties, again, we all face them. No one escapes getting through life without mental health difficulties. And so it's thinking about in what contexts do those mental health normal mental health difficulties spill over into becoming a crisis because of the other things that are going on in our lives at that time. And for those of us who are diagnosed with mental illness, in many cases, of course, that means we would also come under the legislation for disability in our countries and would therefore be registered disabled. So, why is student mental health and well-being a big issue? Well, it's a really big issue in the UK, and I'm guessing it will be a big issue in many of the countries represented by the ECIU Universities. Clearly, it is for Tec de Monterrey in Mexico. Here's a few facts for you. Okay, so from 2007 to 8 to 2015-16, the number of students in the UK disclosing mental health conditions, and I don't mean necessarily mental illness, but mental health issues, challenges, as well as illnesses, nearly quadrupled. It went up from about 3,000 in 2007 to over 15,000 in 2015-16. Now that's the equivalent to the entire first year undergraduate intake of about 4 medium-sized universities in the UK. So that's quite a startling number. And we also know that the majority of mental health issues develop in people by the age of about 24. So what we've got there, so an increase in instances of reported mental health challenges, and a large proportion of those naturally coming from a younger population, and therefore it being inevitable that a large proportion of those are going to be amongst the student population in our universities. We also know students are far more likely to disclose to fellow students and friends than they are to a member of staff. And so there's a barrier there whereby students aren't necessarily going to feel comfortable with talking to the university professionals who are trying to help them. We also know, of course, we must acknowledge that university staff are not immune to mental health issues and illnesses, as indeed no one is in society. We had a survey in 2013 in the UK which found that half of all of the respondents felt their general average levels of stress were high or very high. So that's university staff talking about heavy teaching loads, increased administration, the pressure of doing research and teaching. Why are we in this job, everybody? Let's leave now. Okay, all of those uncertainties around the changes in the sector. And if I think about the UK higher education sector, it's punishing at the moment. It's not just about Brexit, it's about a whole series of government reviews and regulatory frameworks that mean we are really on the spotlight. We are being scrutinised more than ever before. So what does that mean? If we have an increasing proportion of staff who are experiencing poor mental health, and possibly undiagnosed, does that mean they are better able to support students or less able to support students because they obviously are so busy trying to focus on managing themselves? And of course, well, this all presents a big challenge for us. So my first question to you, this isn't for your Post-it notes, this is for you to yell at me, all right, in the room. Okay, so just generally speaking then, what is the wider impact, do you think, of rising levels of disclosed poor mental health amongst students? Why does it matter? Yes?
Well, without well-being, there will be no success, there is no learning, and learning is study.
Top mark. So if mental well-being is poor, then student academic achievement will suffer. If student academic achievement suffers, what's the impact of that upon our societies? Okay, so poor academic achievement in students leads to increased failure, to dropout, Again, what does that mean for society? Unemployment, a whole series of potential crises within society, young people, of course there are mature students as well, so students in general not being able to contribute as well as they might. If students can't contribute as well as they might, then doesn't that mean we're also going to miss out on some of those great intellectual breakthroughs that are going to, I don't know, help us to reverse climate change? So there is a big knock-on effect, isn't there? Poor mental health amongst students and staff in universities mean that some of those intellectual powerhouses within our societies cannot give the contribution that they're set up to contribute. So it's a big deal for all of us. It's not just an internal issue for students. Hence, okay, so clearly everyone gets it. Hence, in the UK, it's a big priority, and so every university in the United Kingdom is going to have a student mental health and wellbeing strategy, and there's an increasing amount of literature and research out there that these strategies are drawing on. And I just did a search in a search engine and immediately I've got Bristol's strategy, I've got a Policy Institute one come up, I've got Universities UK again, I've got York, I've got the Russell Group, which is the group of research-intensive universities in the UK. So they're flooding. So any university that wants to have a look at what another university is doing, it's all pretty accessible to you. You could spend your lifetime looking at everyone else's strategies rather than actually doing your own. Now, all of these strategies, then, they form around kind of different categories of work. So, for example, they'll have stuff in them about the specialist support, so the stuff for students with specific diagnosed problems, the generic support for everyone, the sport, the healthy eating, the counselling, the welfare services for specific periods, the exams, and then the work to design well-being into the curriculum, into pedagogy and into assessment. And by their very existence, all of these strategies are acknowledging that there is a perfect storm, potentially, that students are moving into when they arrive at university, when they are kind of facing absolute transition overload. So here's my next question for you. So what are the factors that cause stress and anxiety for students as they are arriving at university? Okay, individual factors that are going to cause you grief. Suggestions, Frank? Simply arriving at the university. Where am I going? Yes. Others? Having no friends, leaving your friends behind, of course, so missing them as well as then having to find new ones.
Loneliness.
Sorry? Loneliness, yes. Again, because you've left your friend networks behind.
Arriving for like adjusting to new systems.
Adjusting to the new systems, what the bureaucracy of the university, what to do, when to do it, what happens if I do something wrong.
No longer caring parents.
Missing your parents and all of that they've done for you, the bank of mum and dad, all of those cooked dinners, yes.
Taxes.
Sorry?
Taxes.
Taxes, yes, absolute. Finance for students, the first time perhaps that you've really had to manage your money. Choices that you've got to make, suddenly being independent, expected to think it through for yourself. Any more over here?
Being insecure about the course choose for that.
Yes, that point's been made already, hasn't it? Was it Andrea was talking about lots of information about mechanical engineering, but not very much about the detail of what's actually within that course. Oh, Frank wants another one. Go on, Frank. Social, yes, peer pressure perhaps to conform, yes? Oh, right, okay, so you get the picture. Everyone can throw out a whole series of factors, can't you? So let's see what I had on my slide. So leaving home, pets as well. It's not just your friends, it's your pets. Language barriers. Now, no one said language barriers. Now, some of us in this room are really fortunate, aren't we, that you're all speaking English beautifully, and those of us whom English is our first language, you are not expecting me to speak Portuguese. So obviously that is a big issue for many students. Yeah, workload, work-life balance, the number of students we know now who are working part-time, may have caring responsibilities. There are students, I think, that work full-time, aren't there, and trying to manage that alongside their studies. Yes, fear of failure, placements. You know, when you come to the university, but then shortly you're being sent out to yet another place. Okay, so a whole series of factors, and in there, of course, as well, someone mentioned unfamiliar study cultures. Okay, yeah, I think that one of the points that we, the staff, don't understand, again, really relates to something Andrea said, is sometimes I might see something as really petty, but for a student, it's a big deal. It's like, if a student arrives now, do they feel comfortable in coming in while I'm speaking because they've got to come and sit on the front row? So if this was a lecture as part of their degree course, and they may not feel that they can do that, do we tell them, that's absolutely fine, you can do that as long as you're not on your phone as you walk down the aisle? Something, it's setting out the ground rules and the expectations very, very clearly. Okay, and look, and this one, I only learnt this quite recently, and I was shocked. Now, this particular bit of data happens to come from the University of New York, but in America, but it is the same for the University of Nottingham. My colleagues have said to me, this is the case that during your first term at university, generally speaking, you will put on weight because you are eating badly. And I didn't realise that until very, very recently. Right then, so let's think about the contextual factors in all of this. So I think that one of the challenges for university staff, and particularly for academics, is that we've been through these transitions ourselves. And we think that these transitions are part of what has made us who we are. And we look back with nostalgia on our years when Doug was in a garret, in an attic, and Frank lived on one sausage a day, and the accommodation was damp, and we were working all hours. So, we suffered, and so you should suffer too. Yeah, and look at us now. I think what we are overlooking in that view is that the context of higher education changes. And again, if I forgive me if I'm focusing on the United Kingdom, obviously that's the system I know best. If I look at the United Kingdom, we are now, our students are in a mass higher education system. The number of young people going to university is higher, it's greater than ever. And I'm afraid, my dear colleagues here, although you're not students at the moment, are you? You're paid employees of the Students' Union. You're less of an elite now than I was when I went to university. The economic value of your degree across your lifetimes is not quite as high as it was when us older colleagues went to university. It's still high, it's still worthwhile you doing what you're doing, but you don't stand out quite as much. And that's why you feel that you have got to do more than many of us felt we had to do when we were at university. I wasn't a student union officer or a president of a society. I think I joined the choir. I think I was in the choir for my first year and that was it. I didn't join anything else. And if I refer back to our event in Brussels, the ECIU event in November of last year, do you remember, colleagues, towards the end of that session, we asked our student reps in the room, how many of you would like to help run a university? And I things like 3/4 of them put their hands up and said they wanted to be rectors and presidents and vice chancellors. They had real ambition to be in the system and make a change. Now, of course, when us staff, when we were at university, we didn't have events like this, and so we weren't expected to have these kinds of aspirations. So I'm not saying it was easier for us, but it was different. The context was very different, and I think there are additional challenges for students today because of the fact that you are in competition with each other, and there aren't necessarily as many graduate level opportunities perhaps for you. And of course the finance in the UK is a big thing. You know, current students have grants, they don't have grants, mind you, they have loans which they've got to pay back, and so the financial system really is quite different. A good degree from a good university is not really enough anymore. Now the positive, of course, of greater access and massification of higher education is that there are more students going to university from different socio-economic backgrounds and with pre-existing health issues. So the rising number of students who are reporting or going to university with pre-diagnosed issues and illnesses is in part because the university system is making sure that they are able to get to university along with everyone else. And then, before I move on from this, let's just not forget the big issues of our time that young people are worrying about. Look at the United Kingdom. We've got a generational disconnect at the moment between a largely middle and older aged citizenry and politicians who are driving us towards Brexit, and then the younger citizens, most of whom, for whom I would say, I reckon, would say, forget about this, climate change, can we save the planet please? And then we'll worry about our membership of the EU. Okay, and so there are some conflicting priorities there. You know, when I was young, I worried about nuclear war and the arms race. For the current generation, they're worrying about saving the planet. And that's alongside all of those other issues with the universities and that making those transitions. So let's not forget the contextual factors. Right, I'll try and speed up a bit. Okay, so here's a nice picture for you. Just looking inside the culture of universities. There are some creative ways, of course, in which universities are trying to help students at those key stress points and that exam roulette. Have you all heard of puppy rooms? Yes, good. It's not just in the UK then. Apparently there are alpaca rooms as well. So the idea of specific kind of fun ways of relieving stress are quite common now, whether it be yoga, Lego building, Hogwarts therapy, which is obviously Harry Potter themed things, group knitting, bouncy castles, egg and spoon, massage, karaoke. There's a whole range of things you can find going on at universities around the world. At Nottingham you can get discounts, staff discounts, probably student ones as well, if you go and play crazy golf on the campus. And actually I met one of the finance teams last week, just going to play giant football on the campus, and it was their end of the financial year treat. You know, they just finished all the bookkeeping, and so this is like their afternoon team outing. Okay, let's come back to the cultural issues within the academy. And I've already referred to these, some of the outdated attitudes of university staff. Now these can be deeply, deeply held. They can be discipline specific and rooted in really quite false ideas of what counts as rigour or intellectual challenge. You know, the idea that if you're going to be a doctor, you really do need to, suffer before you can, practice. You've got to put in those hours. You've got to be prepared to go anywhere at any time. It's absolutely supposed to be tough. But it's not just about those clinical subjects and those subjects that are leading the student towards a specific profession. You can find it anywhere. Again, just last week, I came across a module in our Faculty of Arts that has a reading list with over 1,200 items on it. Hands up if you think that's a good thing. Frank. That's obscene, isn't it? That is totally, that is my vanity reading list. That is about Frank demonstrating his knowledge rather than about Frank, shame on you Frank, providing effective guidance. Well, how on earth can the student expect to manage? I now want to go and look at that reading list and see how is it organised? Is it broken down by topics? How on earth does a student make their decision? Are there students on that module who think that they are supposed to read every one of those 1,200 items? And now, of course, I've tipped off my Students' Union colleagues, so Cassie is going to go back to Nottingham and ferret out that module. So the trouble is, of course, that for some of us academics, we don't realise that our job has also changed. As the environment and the context changes, so does our role. We're in the fourth industrial age, we're in the information superhighway. My job is no longer to fill the heads of my students with stuff, with knowledge. My job is to train them to navigate that inexhaustible source of information, to develop their critical appraisal and thinking skills, to equip them to be lifelong, life-wide learners. The discipline is my tool for doing this. It's not necessarily the be and end all of my purpose. And so my conundrum is dealing with rising student numbers with that humanity and flexibility that we absolutely need to try and personalise the experience for those students who are in that gang of several hundred students on a module or on a course. So how do we do it? Okay, it's a balancing act then. So universities, we're not health services, but we're not commercial or industrial employers, we're a training ground. And so our strategies need to be about nurturing, growing, supporting. Students aren't arriving fully formed at university. Our job is to help them continue their journey towards formation so that they can leave us better equipped, happy, productive, therefore to make their positive contribution towards society. And at this point, I just want to throw in as well the interconnections between the wellbeing agenda and, again, as I think Cassie was saying, in the equality, diversity, the inclusion agendas. Now, in the UK, we have big attainment gaps for certain groups of our students. Our Black, Asian and minority ethnic students, our disabled students, our mature students. In many cases, you can see that, say, for our Black and minority ethnic students, they may have between a 15 and 25% lower chance of leaving a UK university with a good quality of a degree, a first or an upper second degree. And that's even when we kind of take into account the fact they may have come in from a poorer background, they may have come in with a lower entry requirement. And that's saying that when they arrive at university, we are doing something to them. We are making it worse. And I think the reason I make that point is that we need to ensure that our health and well-being strategies aren't just about the individual, because they're about the university changing, aren't they? Just as much as they are about the universities helping individuals and communities of students to flourish. Hence, getting it right absolutely has to be a balance. And we need humanity and lots of common sense in there. So, what's the strategic approach at the University of Nottingham? There are 5 areas within our strategy, and we've got one of the posters also picks up on this. So, lifestyle, mental well-being, campus community, learning experience, and environment. And again, we've got various kind of overarching principles that try and kind of take us across all of those. I'll dive just a little bit deeper for my last few minutes into healthy learning, because that's the area where I have most agency, I have most kind of input. The key thing is to take a student journey approach. There are many transitions as you go through your university lives. And those student transitions, you can see, well, you probably can't read the diagram on that slide, but it talks about phase 1, which let's say is first year undergraduate, is about building a sense of community and belonging. Get that right, and as you move into phase 2, you can flourish and you can achieve academically. And in the UK system, your grades in your first year don't count towards the class of degree that you come out with. Hence, your first year can focus on community and belonging. And of course, that should support your academic achievement anyway. But any academic who's worried, oh, they haven't got time for sport, you can tell them to shut up, because absolutely they've got time for sport, because then they're in a better position to get on with those assignments. They've got the energy, they've got the health that they need. And then as you move on into the final stages of your undergraduate degree, it's about graduate preparedness, getting ready to transition again out of the academy. And with each of those phases, so phase 1, community and belonging, phase 2, academic achievement, phase 3, graduate preparedness, you can break those down into a whole series of little steps to try and make life that bit easier. Well, not easier, that's the wrong word, smoother, within normal expectations for your students. Okay, a couple of slides here. I hope they're recognised by 2 people in the room, because they're from your university, they're not from mine. Which university am I showing there? Right, I'll have to look up the names and see who's here. I was really impressed when I went around the library at this university, and the top slide shows the kitchen. Yes, it's Tampere. Thank you, Sandra. Who's here from Tampere? Shame on you. You didn't recognise you didn't recognise your own university. No excuses. So what I really liked about the Tampere University Library was it has a fully equipped kitchen in it. Yeah. And at Nottingham, there's endless conversations about, is it safe to have microwaves? And then, a wonderful array of kind of casual seating, again, right next to the kitchen. And it's clearly an area, where, well, to me it looked like it's an area where you can do messy study. Messy, noisy study, and you don't have to pack up your desk to go away to eat. Now, as long as you've camped out and got your slot early. And a really, really good setup. But endless things that we can talk about that can make a difference to students. The pattern of the academic year, big thing at Nottingham at the moment. Is the academic year designed for students' well-being, or is it about how many weeks we're giving staff to do their marking? Why is the pattern of the year the way it is? Is it helpful for students to go away and have a vacation at Christmas and then have to come back to their exams? Maybe you better have the exams before the Christmas vacation, again, because then they could actually switch off. I don't know the answer to these things. These are discussions that we're having. We've talked about accessible information, and we think it's accessible. Are we testing it? Are we checking it? Are we actually getting the students to tell us, no, you think that's clear, but actually it isn't because you're still using academic jargon? The personal tutors. Are the personal tutors, it's ironic, isn't it? I think you do have to train people in compassion. There are colleagues of mine, they just want to stick by the rules. For heaven's sake, sometimes those rules are just wrong and there isn't compassion at the heart of them. Can we just bend them occasionally? So there are some real kind of commonsensical things here. And we've also had colleagues talking about the importance of space and space design, lighting, layout, sound, all of those things to make sure that space is inclusive. And we've got a whole host of things at Nottingham. We've got peer-assisted study support schemes, say in the School of Maths, when 3rd and 4th year students run seminars for 1st year students, to help them with common mathematical problems. We're really thinking through our forms of assessment to think, are we overloading? we've done work that shows that in some cases the University of Nottingham is setting twice as much assessment for one module than the equivalent module at another university. And why are we doing that? We've got plenty of ways that we can show that the standards are the same, the quality is the same, the rigour is the same. So again, are we creating a kind of cycle of potential stress points for both staff and students by setting too much assessment? Sometimes it's enough to be good, isn't it? You don't have to be excellent, brilliant, fantastic all of the time. Let's just be good enough. And timetabling as well. So it's not just the pattern of the academic year, it's the pattern of the working week. Context switching. Are we allowing both staff and students to process, to finish off one thing before they immediately move to the other? We don't build in time to walk between sessions sometimes, for anyone. So I think we create part of this perfect storm ourselves. And in all of this, we have to acknowledge that disconnect between what the staff think and what the students think. Our realities can be quite different. Okay, so practical measures, there are a whole series of things that we can do if we think about that curriculum. And actually, I think the really, really big thing for me, which I would add on to everything that colleagues said in those pitches before I started, was that well-being can be designed in, can't it? You can design it in to our processes and our policies. And for me, that is the number one approach that I would take. Design it in. And then a proportion of staff and students will never reach a crisis point. Those who don't, for other reasons, don't need to become ill, can avoid reaching those stress points that mean that their mental well-being is suffering. Just another thing I'll point out on that slide there, well, a couple. So digital detox, absolutely knowing when to switch off and that we don't have to be online 24/7. What about the debates about, Dag, you referred to libraries or access 24/7. There's another side to that debate, isn't there? Is it healthy for the libraries to be open 24/7? Mind you, I suppose you can go online and get everything you want anyway now, so you can't prevent people from accessing 24/7 if they want to, but it's not always necessarily a positive. And up there, under the staff bit, I've got content advisory notes. Again, just something we're bringing in at Nottingham at the moment. Do we have content? Do we have material in some of our modules which could itself be a trigger point? If it is dealing with genocide, if it is dealing with rape, a whole series of difficult topics. I'm not saying we shouldn't be teaching and exploring these areas, not at all, but are we signposting those to students for whom there may be a real personal connection, which would mean that suddenly, if that material is being presented and they're not prepared, we are pushing them over the edge, we're not preparing them. And again, that's not about going soft, it's about kind of common sense and just helping students to cope and to prepare. Let's throw in as well the curriculum infusion model. This comes from the States. I think it starts at the University of Georgetown. The idea that, and again, I think this relates to, which university was talking about potential, Sandra, was it you talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and linking well-being to those? Well, I think that's potentially a version of curriculum infusion, whereby you say, when good mental well-being is your theme. It's a theme that goes across all of your first year provision, or all of your provision for all levels, undergraduate and postgraduate. And so, yes, every module finds its way in which that relates to the teaching of law, or to the teaching of engineering, or to music, philosophy, physics, maths. And of course it does relate to every single discipline. And if you take a curriculum infusion model, then I think that's a really potentially effective way of changing your culture. I completely get that it's very, very difficult to do, quite daunting. I'm really close to the end now. Okay, so this was a blog that was published just a few days ago, and it comes from the Vice-Chancellor of the University of the West of England, which is in Bristol in the UK. And again, I was just struck by the title. You know, we should help students to take control of their own well-being. And absolutely we should, as long as we take our share of responsibility in also shifting the culture of our institutions and being well aware of those environmental and contextual factors that students cannot change. So you cannot put all of the responsibility on the students by giving them control of their well-being. But I don't mean to criticise the University of the West of England, because I think they have a very neat model. They've developed a whole series of resources and courses, and they take their students through their 5 secrets to success. So, you know, discover your student self. What kind of student do you want to be? What does engagement with your course mean to you? How can we help you to grow your confidence? What do you see as your future? And therefore, what steps you need to take towards achieving that future? And how are you going to connect with others during that journey so that you form connections that perhaps go beyond? You create your support network, don't you? So I think they've got a very nice and neat model, and I think many universities now have versions like that. And you could say everyone's trying to come up with their own university flavour of their recipe for success. So the Trento recipe will be different from the Stavanger recipe and the Twente recipe and the Nottingham recipe. Every university within the ECIU will have its own recipe, but of course we know what happens when you put all those recipes together. You have a positive feast, don't you? A feast of good ideas, hence we're here today. And you're recognising the barriers, being proactive, and again another key phrase there, inclusion rather than accommodation. For instance, it's not about putting a ramp in, is it, for the wheelchair user? It's about just making sure that the whole space is accessible and the wheelchair user doesn't have to go to the designated wheelchair slot at the front of the room. They can move around the room with everyone else. So loads of models out there. So any university who is still grappling with this, you don't have to invent it yourself. You can go and find the various nice, neat little formulas that other universities are using to structure what they're doing. So, before I put my slide up again with your 2 questions to answer for me, the ECIU has its strapline, challenging conventional thinking. So I think we all here, we're playing our part in that, because we're here to really say, well, we're not interested in the deficit model. We're interested in a positive, proactive model, and that's why we're holding this symposium. We are challenging ourselves, we're sharing with each other, and we want to challenge our sector. I think we're also perhaps challenging the remit of this part of the ECIU. Okay, so we're all here as part of the work of the Teaching and Learning Innovation Steering Committee of the ECIU. And I think what we're really all saying is that there are some core principles that we've got to get right and we've got to embed within our policies, our practices, our curriculum. And where we can lead, where I think much of our expertise lies, is in the course design. It's in our use of learning technologies, to build curricula that are inclusive by design and that promote well-being by design and therefore contribute to the good mental well-being and good mental health and well-being of all of us. So that's not particularly funky. It might not sound particularly innovative, but actually it is about changing our frame of reference and changing our preconceptions, to start our curriculum design from the perspective of the student in the 21st century and not from the perspective of the academic in the 20th century. And I think to some extent that's where we still are. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you for your contributions, and please get back to your homework. Answers on your Post-its, please. Thank you.
We have time for 2-3 questions.
Aha, I recognise that person.
Can you repeat the question so
Yes.
that it is?
Is that Elizabeth?
Hi, so I wanted to be a bit of a devil's advocate for the tough love academic. So to what extent is it important to help these students avoid frustration rather than learn how to deal with frustration? Because life is unfair by definition, so why would I give them a misrepresentation of what life is? Because I'm kind of in between the 20th and the 21st century, so...
From Trento, aren't you? Is it Elizabeth? Is it Elizabeth? Yes. Hello. Oh, sorry, Judy, yes. We met in March, didn't we, back in the spring when the ECIU met in Trento.
So going back, for example, to the example of the reading list, is it about reducing the amount of text or teaching them to travel and navigate through these texts and choose whatever is relevant to their own knowledge?
Yes. So the question then is about, well, is it about again, it's about that getting the balance right, isn't it, between kind of almost like giving students very, very clear instructions: do this, do that, read this, write that, read that, and then, but to some extent also giving them the skills to be able to make more of those decisions themselves. So if Julie picked on the example of the 1,200 items on the reading list, okay, so I know that for some of my academic colleagues, not just in Nottingham, but in a range of universities, that they almost like feel that I give a reading list to my students and I have an expectation that because they're a university student, they know what to do, they have the skills, they need to make the judgments, they need to make the choices about what they're going to access, what they're going to use. So that's one extreme. The other extreme may be the academic that says, okay, there are 6 core texts you need to read, and I want you to read pages 32 to 36 for that topic, and then pages 71 to 79 for that. So you might say they're the 2 extremes of the spectrum. I think there's a middle ground in the middle. Now, absolutely, we're about rigor, we're about challenge, we're about stretch, we're about growth. But I think to do all of those, you acquire the skills. So certainly my position would be, I wouldn't put 1,200 items on the reading list. It would have to be the module would have to be worth about 3 years worth of study for that, I think. I would want to do a certain level of signposting. Now, what I don't want to do is to get to a position where my students don't know how to browse. Okay, so you go to the library and let's say you've got 30 items on your reading list. I don't want them to believe that they can only get those 30 items. I want to develop in them the skills that they can look for many of those 30 items, but they can also look around. They can have the judgments. They can look at when something was published, who it's authored by, what they know about the research that's gone into it. So you're absolutely right that you've got to develop those critical skills to enable the students to make the judgments. But those judgments do need to be within sensible parameters because they've got to manage their time as well. Now, how many hours a week is a student supposed to work? Well, it shouldn't be more than 40, should it? So it's got to be manageable, but stretch within that. So it's just the balance thing.
Sorry, I just want to add, I think it's also the cultural representation that we have that pain must be avoided, whereas sometimes can be a problem because, as you said, in our experience as we age, as we grow, we realize that that's what forges strong identities. Not so much our achievements, but our failures.
Yes, so that, again, just slight concern there that the message might be that we need to avoid pain. That, you know, absolutely no, it's not about avoiding pain, because there is normal healthy stress, isn't there, that we all experience every day. It's about universities not creating unnecessary additional stress, which is perhaps you know, on top of that normal everyday stress that we all will experience. Any final questions?
Yeah, I have one. What do you think about the government's inputs into student well-being? Should we pressure the governments to have some input, either financial, regulatory, strategic? Should the recipe be for the whole country and the whole, the whole of universities throughout?
Okay, Augustinas. So that's a question from Augustinas from Kaunas in Lithuania, which I've been to with the ECIU. So what is the role of governments in work to address issues around student mental health and well-being? Well, in the United Kingdom, it is absolutely a government priority. There's been something just this week. There's been various articles in the higher education media around the government telling universities they must do more, and the universities saying, hang on a minute, we are already. So it very much is a government issue. Now, of course, it may not be in some of the other countries within the ECIU network. In the United Kingdom, the government sees it as a priority because the government will recognise the connection with the financial and economic and social impacts of students not being able to play their part. Now, we are a very highly regulated higher education system. There are, we have to report regularly to the government and on the outcomes of our students. We have to show that we are narrowing the attainment gaps between our different groups. And so we are absolutely expected to provide the evidence and the data. We are constantly improving our systems to enable students to get a high quality degree that's going to equip them to be productive in the workplace and in communities. And so we cannot escape it. It is a high thing on the government's priority agenda. It is measured within the UK. If that's not the case in your countries, then again, obviously you have different contextual factors, but I thought at some point it will be a priority area, again, because of that financial impact.
There was a thing that struck me about the pitch you have now. So there was the evaluation, the weight evaluation in relationship with the year of study. So in the first year, it's less, how to say, weighted than the second and the third year's evaluations. So my question is, operationally, do you have any difficulties with professors being, having complex of inferiority because they teach first year courses and they say, how is it possible that my course is less valuable than the one of the next year? Or students also not putting themselves into challenge because they know that already that this kind of evaluation will be, will not influence their outcome.
Which university are you from?
From Trento.
Okay, Trento.
Just as a connection, that could happen also in the relation between the undergrad and graduate programs, because normally what counts for the work, for your placement in the work in the market is your final grade as kind of the graduate.
Okay, so we have an interesting question there about. So in the United Kingdom, many undergraduate degrees are structured in such a way that the grades that you get in your first year do not count towards your final degree outcome. And so does that affect ways in which the staff approach their teaching to those groups? And does that affect the way in which the students treat their work? Okay, now we occasionally talk about this, I think, don't we, in kind of student attitudes to first year modules. So Cassie and Miles, do kind of pipe up if you think you would disagree with me on this. It is in the United Kingdom, there is debate about whether or not what we call the qualifying year, your first year as an undergraduate, should count towards your final degree mark. There are some staff, including staff in our welfare teams, who feel that it should count because it gives students a false sense of what they need to do to achieve, and that students can just lie around and not worry, sail through their first year and then suddenly work hard in year 2. I don't think that many of our students do that. I think that is a very, very kind of small phenomenon if it does exist. Certainly our staff do not see a difference in status between those years, and that actually we're very well aware of the efforts of staff who have to teach really large group sizes in the first year. One of the challenges often, you've got your biggest class sizes in year 1, and then you can start to develop more smaller classes, seminars, more group work as you go through your studies. So we don't perceive a hierarchy in the attitudes of staff between those years. We do have debates about whether or not the first year mark should count, but it always counts in some ways. For instance, take lawyers. So the students who are studying law, their marks may not count towards their degree, but if they don't do well in their first year, they'll struggle to get their placement with a law practice in their year 2. So there are other ways in which you do really need to think about your year 1. Of course, all our messaging to students is year 1 is, it's the first stage of your apprenticeship. It's your real opportunity to learn to develop these skills, which you're absolutely going to be tested in year 2. And the key thing is to remember that those transitions are not just about year 1. The transition between year 1 and year 2 for an undergraduate is very, very important. And so the university needs to put a huge amount of effort into making sure students understand that. And if they haven't started kind of stepping up, have got the kind of support they need when those marks are really going to matter.
So that was Sarah Speigt, Associate Vice Chancellor of the University of Nottingham, and we're signing out now from our viewers around the world on YouTube. Thank you very much. The link will remain available, and if anybody wants to revisit and listen once again to everything that was said today, you can visit the link that has been circulated and is on our website at any time, and it will be available for forever and ever. So thank you very much.
Will you leave your Post-it notes on your seats? I'll contact them up.
So we're going to have a small 5-minute break now, and I'm just going to check out the posters, and lunch session is all ready for action. The poster and lunch session will be just across the hall, okay? It's signposted. Please don't go there yet, because I just want to make sure that it is all set up. It'll be ready in less than 5 minutes, and I'll be out there to indicate to you where to go. Okay, thank you.